any moment.
Great, thank you.
Cindy, once you officially start the meeting, I'll call roll for the committee members.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I'm gonna wait a few minutes.
Yeah, we're not yet. I just want you
okay.
to know I have the attendance sheet, so I'm ready to, when you're ready for me to do that, I'm ready.
Oh, great. And Joe, just so you know, and for others that just joined, hi Karen, hey Beverly.
Hi.
We are live on YouTube right now, so I just want everyone to know that.
I appreciate
No
that.
cussing.
I don't think YouTube's terms of service prevent people from cussing, by the way. But
We have our dignity.
I'll try to restrain myself.
Okay.
I did try to watch only briefly a previous meeting of yours, but it's up there, but it wasn't playing properly for me. I don't think it was on your side. It's something to do with my connection.
Cindy, I'm gonna start the webinar now, and we'll see attendees start to populate.
Hi, everyone.
Who's that?
Sandra, good seeing
Good
you.
to see you.
Sandra, I'm also gonna make you a co-host as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Valerie.
Hello.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
I think you see me, but like my head has to be higher. Hold up. That's better.
That's perfect. I just informed a few other folks that joined that we have just streamed out to YouTube. We haven't officially started the meeting yet,
Okay.
but we're happy to have you here, and I think we'll be starting within the next couple of minutes.
Great.
And we're so grateful to have you and Joe be here to inform our discussion this evening. So thank you. I'm going to do a screen share test. If you guys don't mind. Look good? Okay.
It works.
Thanks. I just wanted to check in on a quorum. Seems we have a quorum.
There are no quorum rules for committees.
Oh, okay. Good thing. Good thing I checked in. Okay. Okay. Well, Does everybody feel good? Shall we get this party started? Okay, great, great. So my name is Cindy Vanden Bosch, and I'm very grateful to everyone that is here tonight. It is November 15th. This is our Ability and Access Committee meeting. And I just wanted to start out with a few announcements and agenda items. So I have officially kind of opened the meeting and would like to walk us through our plan for the meeting tonight, as well as just how we're going to be communicating within Zoom for this meeting. So I'll start here with the agenda. So we are going to start with our guests who are here with us this evening. We have Valerie Joseph, who's an accessoride advocate, and Joe Rappaport, who's the executive director. Both of them are affiliated with the Brooklyn Center for Independence of the Disabled. And they actually are here upon our request. And Sandra, who is our new vice chair, and I had a discussion about how we really wanted to kick off.
It might be.
Yes.
Oh,
Pardon?
No, sorry. I meant to have my sound off. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. So how important it would be as we discuss what our priorities are going to be with incoming newly elected officials coming into office for the district at the city council level, as well as a new mayoral administration. We wanted to put together as a board and as a committee recommendations and priorities that we can share with these incoming elected officials and leadership in agencies as we move into the new year. So we felt that it was important to hear directly from BCID, which has been working, well, they'll be speaking about the work they do and about some of the most pressing issues that they think should be addressed. And I'm sure some of those, many of them will coincide with some of the priorities that we've been discussing as a board over the last few years. So the first part, we're going to do a presentation from them. I will ask that you please keep your Q&A, your questions limited to the scope of their presentation specifically. And then we'll move into reviewing sort of recommendations and priorities that we've already discussed. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to look back, where have we been? What areas of focus have we discussed? And then we want to hear from all of you about what might be missing and what can we add to our priorities for next year and for our work plan. And this, we're not going to get it all done tonight. We want to respect everybody's time. So hopefully we'll be able to cover as much ground as possible. And then we may need to follow up with a subsequent meeting. In terms of guidelines and procedures for tonight, I want to draw everybody's attention to the closed captioning. There's a CC button on your screen, or it might say show subtitles, so you can read what is being said. There's live automated closed captioning. Sometimes the closed captions get words wrong. If there's something that you don't understand, please be sure to put that into the Q&A. And I know that we have board staff behind the scenes that'll be checking the Q&A, and we'll be sure to stop and make sure that there's clarification if there's anything that's confusing on that front. Please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. And then after you do speak, well, obviously unmute yourself when you speak, and then please be sure to mute yourself again. That'll help us keep the meeting moving along. Please feel free, as always, to raise your hand. Use the raise hand function for the board members, as well as people from home. Or I guess we're all from home maybe right now. But if you're an attendee to the webinar, you may also raise your hand and speak. And so feel free to do that. We also want to encourage you to use the Q&A function for questions that you have as we go along. If you're joining by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical issues, please email bk07@cb.nyc.gov. So this here is the Q&A control. So this is what you can press in order to enter your question. I wanted to provide an update on who is serving on the committee because we have a revised list for the committee. So I'm the chair, Sandra Alfonso. Congratulations, she's the new vice chair. And I'm going to invite her to come on in just a second to share her connection to accessibility and interest in this committee. We have Joan Body, who's been a longtime attendee, but not a member. And I'm so excited that she's now officially a member of this committee. John DeLuper, David Estrada, Beverly Kleinman, Jimmy Lee, Julio Pena III, and Karen Rolnick. So before we bring on our guests, I'd just like to invite Sandra to come on and share just a little bit about herself and why she really wanted to serve in a leadership capacity on this committee.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Sandra Alfonso. I am the founder of Adaptability. We customize bicycles for adults and children with disability. And I'm very excited to be part of this committee, helping and giving the opportunity to make things easy.
Did Sandra
For running
freeze?
the disability community. Thank you.
Great, great. Okay, wonderful. So I think we need to take roll call. Is that correct? Okay.
Okay, I'll be calling the committee members. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, say here or present, and then mute yourself again. Cynthia Vandenbosch.
Present.
Thank you. Sandra Alfonso. Sandra?
I think she's having audio problems.
Okay, I see you're here. We'll mark you present. Joan Body.
Here,
Thank you. John DeLuper. You can unmute yourself.
Present.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sandra. John DeLuper, you can unmute yourself.
All right, I'm present. Sorry, the audio cut out for a minute. Thanks.
Thank you. David Estrada. Beverly Kleinman.
Present.
Thank you. Jimmy Lee. Julio Pena III. And Karen Rolnick.
Here.
Thank you, Karen. Board members who are not on the committee, I'll mark you as present for this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to, in just a second, move into the first item on the agenda, but I wanted to start by kind of celebrating a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years as a community board to improve accessibility. First of all, on a civic participation level, by being a board that has looped its physical space, which we did right before the pandemic, but I'm so excited in the future to be able to get back and take advantage of that technology. I don't know about you, we're going to look at this a little bit later, but just taking a look at the capital and expense budget requests that the board recently passed through, many of them are to increase accessibility, whether it's to employment services, education, playgrounds. And so we'll review a lot of those later, but I think one thing that Sandra and I have been discussing is that our hope is that eventually we don't need to have an ability and access committee and we'll be able to work ourselves out of the job. But we're really proud of the work that not only all of us have done, but just the board in general and people in the community to support our efforts to ensure that our neighborhoods are accessible as possible to all people and especially to people with disabilities. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Valerie Joseph and Joe Rappaport, who are our guests this evening, who are going to share sort of what their organization has been doing during the pandemic and to serve people with disabilities, and also discuss with us what they perceive as some of the bigger policy issues and issues that we might want to discuss and that could inform our conversation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Valerie Joseph, and I'm going to start off by having Joe speak, and then I will come back on. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Joe.
Valerie, and thanks to the committee members. And if the steam heat here is making too much noise, tell me, and I can move, but this is the place that I usually am when doing these kinds of meetings, and I really appreciate the chance to meet with you. You're a rare bird, you know, in the community board world, as far as I can see, based on not a huge amount of research, but I did look at some other community boards, and you know, the emphasis on accessibility is important, on disability, and it's something that's, you know, often neglected. Actually, up in Albany, for the first time, there are disability committees in the Assembly and the Senate. There never was anything in the Senate before, and before this session, the Assembly had just had a task force, which was generally a position for very junior members. So there's been some changes at the state level, and I can see at your community board. You know, our organization has been around since 1956. We are now an independent living center. The independent living movement started in the early 1970s as a movement of advocates from the disability community. And we follow that practice. There are something like 41 independent living centers here in New York State, and it's across the country and across the world. There are many others. They're run by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities. Our organization, as I said, started 65 years ago. I think our actual anniversary is in about a week or two. And it was founded by parents of people of children with muscular dystrophy who, as their kids were getting older, realized, hey, we got to figure out what we're doing here. As they become independent in the 50s, that was just not the norm. Since 1979, 1980, when we became an independent living center, we worked on a wide variety of projects, and we offer many services right now. And some of the people in your community may be interested in getting counseling or help with benefits. We have a program where we go into nursing homes and try to help people get out of nursing homes who are disabled and wouldn't otherwise be there except for lack of services. We have a community health worker program where we offer peer counseling to people in the community. And if anybody is interested in sending people our way, we're always looking for participants. We have people who speak English, obviously, but Spanish, Arabic, and Creole as well. This involves like a weekly call just to check in on people, but we go well beyond that, help people get, and Valerie can talk a little bit about this, help people get Access-a-Ride authorization or other services that they need. It's a program now funded by the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation. We also sue the MTA and other entities when they don't respond to our very reasonable requests for accessibility. So right now we're involved in 3 lawsuits against the MTA about subway access. One about their inability to keep elevators running, to keep their elevators fixed, and 2 about the lack of access in subway stations around the city. And I know in your community, there are several that are completely inaccessible. And that's, we think, a problem. We think it violates the New York City human rights law. And so far we've made some progress on that. And we're hoping at some point we get an agreement with the MTA or a ruling from a judge. This has been going on for quite a while almost since I started at BCID about 4 or 5 years ago. I want to let Valerie talk a little bit about the work she does, and then I want to just return briefly to some of the things that you were talking about, Cindy, in terms of priorities that you might set for your elected officials. We're actually working on a disability platform right now. We have some of it in pretty good shape, and some of it is in less good shape. So I'm happy to talk about some of the things that we've already identified, but I really want to hear from you, from the members of the committee, to see what you're working on, what you've been thinking about, because as I said, we're not done with our platform, and we're still working on it. So we'd be interested in hearing your point of view. But Valerie, you want to talk for a bit about what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Good evening, everyone, once again. So my name is Valerie Joseph, as I said in the beginning, and I'm the accessory advocate for Brooklyn. So when you have anybody that needs accessory and you send them to our office, they'll be talking to me. I started back in 2017 also, just a bit right after Joe. And I am a individual in a wheelchair for those who are non-sighted. I'm a Black female and I'm middle-aged. So what do I do at BCID? For one, I help individuals fill out the application, which is an extensive application. For some it's not. I have helped our organization and other organizations that we are with in committees, excuse me, have the base fare, which is $275, stay $275 for our customers. And that was a really good win. And hopefully it stays that way for a while, but with the changes that are going on, you never know, but I'm hopeful. I would also like to say we have an on-demand program that Access-a-Ride does, and that is for taxis and other for-hire vehicles. And right now, 1,200 participants are able to use it. They are going to extend it, but we're not sure when, to a random sample of 1,200. So that'll be 2,400 participants. And so that's another project that I'm working on with the other ARG members, which is ARG is the Access-a-Ride Reform Group, and ARG means frustration. So we're frustrated. That's why we named it ARG. It's a little catch, but it's a very good organizational team that we have, that we are working on a lot of the different things that are going on right now. And for one, we concentrate on the lack of drivers right now. We're talking to the MTA about that, the lack of drivers, the lack of, when it comes to the, what is that called? Excuse me, when it comes to being a driver for the Access-a-Ride program, they're saying that there's lack of drivers right now. And we're trying to figure out why there's a lack of drivers and what can we do to help. We also listen to the participants, and we are a liaison, meaning we, the advocates, are a liaison from the public to the MTA. What else do I do?
That's a pretty full description.
I'm thinking of more, but
yeah, well, you can chime in as we move forward. But Valerie's been a lead organizer, and the on-demand program, for instance, was in part due to the advocacy we did. Makes a huge difference for people. Unfortunately, partly because of some of the reasons that Valerie mentioned, it's not going as well as we had hoped. And our big plan is to, would be to expand it for everyone who uses Access-a-Ride. Unfortunately, we've had trouble convincing the MTA that that's a good idea, even though it can make a huge difference for people. So thanks, Valerie. Both of us could talk a long time about things that we would like to see, but I am interested in hearing from you and some of the things that you've thought about in terms of housing, transportation, employment, and so on, education, health. So if there are questions for us, both of us are happy to answer them.
Yeah, so I would like to take questions in just a second here, but what I'm going to do is provide a summary that brings us all kind of on the same page of what we have discussed and worked on over the last, I'd say, year and a half, 2 years, and just issues that this is a broad scope, but just for the purposes of brevity. We definitely know that we need more support for students with disabilities who live in the district. And so education is one area and especially District 75 services. Transportation and sanitation, so having to do with accessible paths of travel. We still have many curbs that haven't been cut. So we need, we want to see that the city sort of delivers on that promise. Reduce bus service. With the reduced bus service, then people are having difficulty with transportation, something that I'm sure you're familiar with. We have also been requesting more bus shelters and benches. Employment issues. We do a lot. We have one of the largest walk to work communities in our district, but oftentimes the workforce development services that are available in our community aren't coordinated or synchronized with some of the customized employment programs. So we'd like to see people with disabilities who want to work in the district be able to access those same kind of services to get placed in the district. So that's something we've explored. We did have a meeting about increasing accessible public restrooms across the city and in the district. Housing, just in the last housing meeting, there was a decision to form an accessible, affordable housing task force. So our committee and the housing committee will be teaming up on that to kind of dig deeper into issues around accessibility in affordable housing. And then accessible playgrounds, really, this is something that we're asking for. We have several older playgrounds that need to be rehabilitated. We want to see that those are fully accessible. And last but not least, civic engagement. We want, the mantra of nothing about us without us. We want to engage more people in the district who have disabilities with this committee, with the board, as well as in sort of the work that we're doing to try to address issues that exist in the district that connect in some way to their lived experiences and expertise. So that is in a nutshell. And then we've made a whole bunch of specific asks, but I would like to open it up and invite my colleague, Joan Botti, to share her question or a perspective that she's interested in hearing more about from you.
Thanks, Cindy. Joe, I want to thank you for your presentation. And my latest great big peeve with the MTA is the fact that the MTA board voted that the tellers in the station booths do not exchange, are not handling money any longer. And people with eye disabilities that have a problem seeing the machine and don't know how to work the machine And 99% of these people, they don't come out of the booth to help anyone. So that's the top of my list this year. Plus that our subway stations are not accessible, especially up here in the terrace. We have a subway station on Prospect Park West that has 5 entrances. Although it's a local station, that's a very, very, very busy station. And then there's the other one on Fort Hamilton Parkway that is, there's just absolutely no consideration. And those are my 2 top pet peeves. And if you could advocate for us, I'm with you. Anything you need, contact me.
Thank you. Do you want to, how do you want to do this?
Yeah, why don't we hear from Karen and John DeLuper, and then we'll have you respond to everyone's questions or concerns. How does that sound? Does that sound like a good plan, Joe? Okay. All right. So Karen?
Yeah, I just want to know what exactly is the Access-a-Ride on-demand program?
Okay, great. So I'm sure we can field, BCID can help field that question. And John, if you'd like to come on.
Sure. My question was also about that on-demand program, because I had heard that there were like 2 programs related to that. Like one was with Ubers and Lyfts, and the other one was with you wouldn't have to schedule your Access-a-Ride in advance. And I wanted to know more about how that worked and where that was, because I had heard, and I don't know if this is true, that the MTA was reducing or getting rid of them due to the pandemic. And I figured, since you mentioned as a coordinator that, I figured you would be the best person to ask on that.
And I have one final question in addition to those, which is about the disability committees at the state level and what they're working on right now. And if you could provide us with some, whatever you've learned about what's happening in those committees at the moment, that would be helpful.
Sure. I should have written the names of the people who made questions. I think that was Joan who started with the, who asked about how they're not handling money. Yeah, we appreciate you bringing that up in the list of things that we have been meaning to talk to the MTA about if they bother to hear from us. That is actually one of them, and I appreciate your mentioning it. The Graham, I've been working for better or for worse on transportation issues, not just as a disability advocate since 1987, which is embarrassing to admit. And I was part of the Strap Hangers campaign for many years, so actually 1983. And one of the first things that I worked on was preventing the MTA from closing what were then called token booths, and I think they're now called station booths, not that it makes a difference. And we've, it's just been, a retreat after retreat after retreat. And so it was very disappointing that they decided to stop handling money. Every every transit authority president, every MTA chair comes for, we're going to do it differently, and we're going to have people out there and so on. And that continues to be what they say, except they never really bothered to ask the workers what they wanted to do and whether they were willing to do that. And I think a lot of the workers feel pretty exposed. They like being in the booth. And that is either going to have to change or they're going to have to come up with a new plan. In Washington, DC, for instance, there are people out there and they help you with the machines, which are even more confounding than the ones here, in my view. But I've made a note about that, and I should follow up on that. Let's see, there were other questions about the on-demand. Val, do you want to take a shot at that and I can fill in? Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so the on-demand program uses yellow and green taxis. And it's for the same 275. We have an app, the Curb app, which the 1,200 participants were able to download on their phone, and you can get a ride when it's working properly within minutes. And sometimes that right now is not the case, unfortunately. And so they added other companies to help with the demand. So you have Arrow, you have Medi, MEDI, which is Uber's, and you have one more, which is Limosis. And this was supposed to help streamline the rides so everybody can get a ride when they needed it. Now, as I said, it was only the 1,200 who were able to use this program, and they were picked by pretty much raising your hand. And then they closed the program to those 1,200 and didn't add anybody else. So what the app does is you put your starting address and your destination, and it sends it to the supposed closest person near you. They pick you up, and they're also used by people who have all different mobile devices, mobility devices, excuse me, and also blind and deaf. So they did a pretty much of a sample of the participants. And so, as I said, it picks you up from point A, brings you to point B. You put it in on an app, the person picks you up, they ask you your name, and from there, they'll either lock you in or help you in however you need, drop you off, you give them the 275, and you go on your way. And I, who live all the way in Queens Village and work in Brooklyn, in the beginning, it wasn't easy because there weren't cabs out near me. There were cabs in Brooklyn, but to get near me, it took some time. So finally, they branched out, and now I can get to work on time. And since we're working from home, I really haven't traveled that much, but when I do go into the office, it's pretty easy now that we have these other companies who came on board.
So thanks. I just want the idea of on demand was to use some of the technology that has developed over the last 30 years, GPS, which is what e-hail via Uber and Lyft use, and yellow cabs do, to take advantage of that, so that instead of calling a day or two in advance for a ride, which I'm sure you all know, you're required to do using the standard Access-a-Ride service, you can get a ride when you need it, where you want to go. Unfortunately, only 1,200 people were a part of it. Valerie mentioned earlier that there was some talk of expanding it. We're not sure what's going to happen with that, and whether it will ever happen. Right now, we're sort of in a hold the fort kind of situation where we want to keep the program for the people who have it, and we'll possibly look for another administration to expand it because the current folks at the MTA don't seem particularly interested. But it's made a huge difference, and Val can talk, sometimes in the morning when we were in the office, I'd say, hey, can you go to this meeting in the afternoon? Before on demand for her, she wouldn't have been able to go. If she needed to, if it was more than a few blocks away, and she needed to use Access-a-Ride. So this has made a huge difference for the people in the program. We'll see what happens. I want to answer.
And I would just like to add one more thing.
Sure.
That using Access-a-Ride has made a life change for me. where, as Joe was
Using on
saying, I
demand.
can get to work on time with the on-demand program. Before on-demand, I was getting to work an hour and a half to 2 hours late. And if I didn't have anybody on my side, like Joe, who understood the program, understood where I needed to be, how I needed to get there, I would have been out of work. So this program has changed my life.
So it has made a huge difference for for the people in the program. You talked about employment and the ability to go where you want, where you need to be for a job is essential. Even, we certainly support the idea of remote work, and that's certainly how we're operating more or less right now. But, not every job can be done remotely. And sometimes you just want to get out of the house. And the ability to, go from place to place makes a huge difference, not just for work, but for everything that you want to do. People who are more mobile, who don't use Access-a-Ride, have all these options that Access-a-Ride users don't have. I just wanted any more questions about this. I'm happy to answer them, or Val will. So I'll just answer the fourth point, which I think Cindy had mentioned. You have a few Cindys on this call, by the way, I just noticed. So far, the Assembly Committee, along with the Labor Committee and a third committee, had a hearing on employment, actually, on employment in the disability community. It went on for several weeks, it seemed, actually maybe 12 hours or something. There were a lot of good ideas. There was some focus on the sub-minimum wage, which some people in shelter workshops still get. New York City is not, in New York State, it's not illegal here, though it has been eliminated in other states. And that became a focus, unfortunately. We support the elimination of the sub-minimum wage, to be clear. But some of the other concerns that we wanted to raise got a bit lost in the discussion. I myself testified primarily about transportation changes that could be made, not just in New York City, but across the state, that would make employment more accessible to people, to disabled people. The Senate hasn't done that much, actually. I'm not sure what the status is right now, but that's not been a focus.
All right, thank you so much. And I see that we have Jeremy and Cynthia's hands raised. So Jeremy, would you like to come on?
Thank you. So I wanted to just mention, first of all, that the President signed the federal infrastructure bill today. So there hopefully will be a large injection of money into city infrastructure, including the MTA. And when we had a presentation several months ago from our MTA rep, he let us know that if federal funding came through, 36th Street subway station was supposed to be in the next round of elevator funding. So I wanted to make sure that we make that a high priority, to make sure that that remains funded, or will become funded through the federal infrastructure funding. But I also wanted to ask our guests, Joan brought up the 15th Street station. We have other stations that we prioritize. 59th Street became the first station in our entire community board last year to actually get an elevator. I think we were the last community in New York City to get one. Do you have a list of priorities for subway stations, or the type of subway stations that should be high priority, that would help us to advocate or to have a better sense of what our priorities should be? And then I have one other question beyond that. You're muted.
Yes, sorry. I was in the middle of looking up a list of stations to see about 36th Street. Our view is that it doesn't matter whether there's federal money or not. Obviously, money makes a huge difference. And there is there's a lot of money. I can't remember the number. I think it's 1.75 billion that is intended for accessibility improvements. Senator Duckworth was instrumental in getting that in the infrastructure bill. She is disabled, as you may know. Our view is that the MTA should make all the stations accessible. There is a list of priorities that they put forward. It's about 76 stations. I'm sorry, 68 stations. I apologize. And I just can't by the end of this meeting, I'll have looked up whether 36th Street is, or other stations in your district are slated to be renovated and made accessible. I'm pretty sure 36th Street is one of them.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Please.
Go ahead.
I had another issue. I thought you.
Oh, okay. So, we've, just to be clear, we've sued the MTA, as I mentioned earlier. We think that shutting out 5-10% of the population from using subways, it's not just people in wheelchairs. Not that that isn't important. Obviously, we want everyone to use the subways, but a lot of older people won't use the subways because they're not accessible. My partner has a knee problem, often can't use them, that kind of thing. So it's important for everyone. What's your other question?
So my other question was actually about when you sue the city. I wanted to point out one of the embarrassments that we have at the community board is we're in a city building, but we don't have accessible bathrooms. But we have a budget for it. Since 2014, the city just won't spend the money. It's sitting there in the budget and it's not being spent. So I was just thinking, maybe somebody should sue us.
In our accessible, in our disability platform, we actually don't specifically mention bathrooms, but we have a part of the voting and civic engagement piece, which includes making meetings accessible and making offices accessible. I didn't, bathrooms obviously are part of making offices accessible. I'm not an attorney. I'd have to talk with my colleagues who are the firm that typically represents us. It's a not-for-profit firm called Disabilities Rights Advocates. We'd have to see if it's a systemic problem. We have sued, we are part of a lawsuit over the lack of access at police precincts. And I can tell you that the city is horrendous on this stuff. They fight as if, they have no money at all. The police department, I've heard, has a few dollars, but they really don't want to make their stations, their precinct houses accessible. And their the approach to doing construction in general is horrendous. So, let me talk to my colleagues.
Thank you. It was kind of a tongue-in-cheek suggestion.
I understand. No,
I'm happy with that.
I understand that, but on the other hand, often a good letter from a law firm can spark people to do things. That's usually the approach we take. We don't sue right away.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Cynthia, I believe Cynthia Gonzalez, and then Cynthia Felix, you're on deck. So Cynthia Gonzalez first.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to start by thanking our guest tonight for bringing this important information to our community board. And, as a social worker myself, I have had a lot of experience in working with the disabled in many different work that I have done in my career. What I have a couple of questions. The first question is the Access-a-Ride on-demand program. Who pays for this? Is this paid for like Medicaid pays for this? Because, you know, getting a ride from like an Uber or something like that for $275, who's doing that unless, you know, they're getting paid, you know? Because they certainly don't charge the same as the MTA to get from place to place. That was my first question. And then again, I wanted to bring to light that, you know, people classified as disabled, there's a wide range of disabilities. And under that, of course, are mental disabilities. And, you know, just to give you an example, like the autism spectrum, it's a spectrum because there are some people that are very high functioning and some that are not that, you know, very low functioning, even though they're not classified, you know, within, you know, the developmental disabilities. So the thing is, I'm questioning the employment, you know, the employment program that you have for these people, because I was not aware that sheltered workshops were eliminated. So the question is, you know, for those people that are not, how should I say, high functioning, they're not high functioning, they're lower functioning for whatever reason, whatever level of retardation or, you know, mental incapacity that they have. You know, what is the alternative? I'm just shocked to hear this, because these people, they love to work. It gives them something to do, some place to go. It gives them a social life. And without that, I'm just like, I'm stunned. How could this happen?
Val, do you want to answer the question, you know, about the on-demand program first? And who pays for it? It's part of Access-a-Ride, right?
Yes. The on-demand program is a sub of the Access-a-Ride program, if you want to put it that way. The on-demand program is paid for by the dollars that the MTA gets. Right. So basically what it does is, if a trip costs, let's say $30, the client, which is the customer, pays the $275, and the rest gets paid by the MTA.
Right. I think it's really important to remember that the MTA's own cost for its own service, last I looked, were about $82 per ride. So the use of on-demand actually reduces the cost to the MTA. You know, the problem, unfortunately, is that the MTA doesn't want to you know, the MTA is worried that too many people will take rides. It's a much better program. It actually gets you to where you want to go. And so the MTA doesn't want to expand it because it's going to cost them too much, even though the per ride cost is something like half of what it costs to offer their regular service. You know, getting back to your other observation, I just want to make it clear, you know, the word retardation and so on, that's pretty passe. It's not used anymore. In terms of shelter workshops, you know, there's no doubt that there are some, there's a community element for people who work at shelter workshops. They are not banned in New York State, just to be clear. They exist. You know, the question is whether people who are working, should they be paid a reasonable wage? And our view is that they should. I understand, and I listened to a few hours of testimony about it. There are people who, support the use of shelter workshops. For some people, I don't know, maybe they're the right thing, but for a lot of people, it really restricts their ability to live independently. Not everybody's going to live independently. We understand that, but it really can be a very confining sort of approach. And our community has taken a very strong position against the subminimum wage because of that. Just to be clear about BCID, we welcome all comers, anybody who wants to use who needs to use our services for the benefits counseling, for Valerie to help to get involved with our advocacy. We're there. We don't have a particular disability that we focus on, which is different than a lot of organizations who, focus on a particular issue or, disability. Nothing wrong with that, except our mission is to serve people, all people who have disabilities.
If I may say, just to add to that, it is my belief that, people that are, I'm going to say the people that I knew that were in sheltered workshops also received, federal aid for their disability. So this was more like a supplement. But if I was to say that for any disabled person in this country, what really limits them is they are below the poverty level. So anybody below the poverty level, whether you're disabled or you're just a low income worker, trying to support, a family, that in itself is the problem, that people, that don't make a living wage. And even if you do make a living wage, let's say you're making $15 an hour, that doesn't even pay the rent these days, so poverty is one of the things that, and I brought up, I'm very well aware that the word retardation is no longer used, but I couldn't find the right word to express myself, so I brought it to that. But the thing is that, bringing people into independence, whether they're disabled or not, it's about the finances. It's about, how is it going to get paid for? So I think that we have to advocate for people who are disabled to get more money when they're on disability, because, a disability could end you up in a homeless shelter.
Right. And in fact, probably more than 50% of the people in homeless in shelters have some kind of disability.
And therein lies the problem, that there is not enough resources for these people because they're not seen as being valuable to the society. And I think that a lot of advocacy has still to be done in that area of making these, people human to the people that need to support them.
Thank you, Cynthia Gonzalez. Cynthia Felix, would you like to ask a question of our guests? And then I think if there aren't any questions after that, we'll start sort of reviewing what our priorities are and see if our guests, if they have time, if they have any feedback for us. So Cynthia Felix.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Thank you for joining us today and sharing some of the strategies and advocacies. And I actually have a question or comment rather about invisible disabilities. As we know, not all disabilities are visible. And very often those with invisible disabilities are met with disbelief, always have to explain, I myself have invisible disabilities, they're not physical necessarily, but I'm disabled nevertheless. And what do you suggest could be strategies to not only educate people more, but to really advocate to be inclusive of everybody so that all disabilities are recognized, not necessarily those that are obvious? And I know that's, a big question for a bigger thing. I see Cindy smiling. but I know it's a challenge for many, and it kind of goes on what Cynthia is saying, because it also goes with people who have mental disabilities. That's not always obvious, but it's there. And sometimes they're misunderstood, probably the most, the mental disabilities. So I had a question about that, because we do want to create safe and accommodating environments for individuals with invisible disabilities.
Sorry. Okay. So yeah, it is a big problem. You know, I tend to focus on sort of how things go with the MTA, just because that's partly my background and partly something that BCID works on. And, you know, there are, you know, getting authorized to use Access-a-Ride, for instance, becomes very difficult, because there are plenty of reasons that people who have invisible disabilities can't ride the subways, or but you know, the MTA doesn't recognize those. So when you go for an assessment, they make you walk up some steps. Well, you can walk up some steps, but you know, you might have epilepsy and be at risk of collapsing in a subway station, and you don't get approved. This happens in a variety of ways, whether it's a mental disability or some other kind of hidden disability, invisible disability. You know, I'm not 100% sure how you make, you know, I think the advocacy has to happen on all these questions of unemployment is obviously a key one. You know, increasing the amount of money that people get if they are on disability, as Cynthia mentioned earlier, would make a big difference for folks. Making sure they can, you know, people can get around and get housing, all the things that you're undoubtedly about to talk about. So I'll let you move on with that. And I'm still looking for the list of subway stations that the MTA has said that it would renovate, so I can meet my promise to tell you by the end of the meeting.
So Joe, a follow-up to that. So like, for example, the epilepsy, that's a perfect example that someone would be denied Access-a-Ride. So how can we advocate to get those things perhaps added to conditions, or what are the means that someone who gets denied because they have something that the MTA doesn't deem as a disability, but is indeed a disability and is recognized as a disability, to add it to those lists, because people then get frustrated and don't do it. Right. So I know examples of people like that, they get dizzy and pass out, or, you know, whatever the reason may be, they may have anxiety, you know, etc., but they are diagnosed with that. So how do you get those things added so that it is recognized that we could advocate for that?
Yeah, we've been pushing for a few things, one of which is to get rid of the in-person assessment centers. Valerie did a survey of the other transit authorities in New York State and found that no one else has you come in. So what you instead send in is your, you know, information about your condition, either from a doctor or another professional who can, you know, occupational therapist or whatever. And what happens is that people are authorized to use it without much question. Up in Binghamton, they were rejecting a lot of people. There was a committee that was put together to evaluate why, you know, to sort of do a second hearing. And eventually the Transit Authority learned that they were going to lose at the committee level because they were refusing people inappropriately. So we're trying to get rid of the assessment centers, which cost millions of dollars a year at the MTA. We're not making too much progress, unfortunately, but we're trying. And there's a state bill, actually. I don't know the number off the top of my head. You know, that we could, you know, that we're hoping people will support from Brooklyn. And I can get you that information. Let me make a note.
Thank you, Joe.
Sure.
Valerie, I see that you have your hand raised and we'd love to hear from you.
No, I was just going to say about the assessment centers and about the letters. I've dealt with a lot of people who've been denied, I will be honest, but the more in depth the letter is, the better it is. And that makes sense. As of you were saying, the epilepsy, I've dealt with people who had epilepsy who were denied and went back to the doctors and said, but I got denied. You didn't put enough information on what happens to me while I'm in a crisis, for example, or what happens when I go into a panic attack. So the more detailed, the better. And for me as an advocate, and I'll have people come to me and say, I'm discouraged. Don't get discouraged. The more you push, the more things happen. So if you're an advocate for yourself, the harder you push, the harder you get things done. And my job is hard, but I do advocate for those who are voiceless.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Joe and Valerie, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. I know that so much of your work is helping people navigate sort of benefits, and I don't know if there's anything on that front. I mean, there's a lot, I'm sure, but anything, especially over the past year with the pandemic, if there's anything else that you think might be helpful, and or I can share what we've sort of requested as a board, as a place to start, and then maybe you can respond to that if you'd be willing. And I do want to be conscious of time. We're going to try not to go too much longer, but we do want to sort of pull up our priorities and see if you have any responses to those, unless there's anything anything else you'd like to share.
All I would say, I really appreciate the chance to hear your questions. It's really helpful. I've made a lot of notes. All our services are free, by the way. I'm not sure I said that. And you may know somebody who would like to participate in the community health worker program, either as somebody who's disabled who wants. We still have some openings. It's a very part-time job, but you're trained, and I think it's people enjoy doing it. But if you know somebody who would like a call every week, we're still looking for people to participate in that way. It's not just a call. We help with, Valerie helps people get Access-a-Ride, and we help people get the benefits they deserve. And we've made a big difference, I think, in the quality of life for many people. I do want to report, and I will put it on the chat if there is a chat. I can't quite tell, or I'll send it. No, there isn't. Okay, so Cindy, I will send you the list, and assuming we're talking about the same 36th Street station on the D and the N and the R, it's in the list, and federal money or not.
Great. And we also have 15th Street in our list.
Let me take a look while we're talking.
Yeah, but yeah, and we can also we have the MTA in on a regular basis with the Transportation Committee. So we will continue to ask, as we have for the last many years. So I'm going to step into the second item on the agenda. And I actually just wanted to use as our reference point the capital budget priorities that they're not listed in, and it's a sample of them. It's not all of them. But as we think about specific asks that we're going to make of our elected officials and the sort of new administration that's coming in, it seemed to me to be sensible to start with what we as a community board have identified as key priorities and sort of use that as our base and foundation. So you can see, I'm not going to read through all of these, but it's travel related. So it's replacing sidewalks in Windsor Terrace, on East 5th Street, and the Prospect Park Expressway, sidewalks and curbs, shelters and benches, like we discussed earlier, the subway stations, bus service, and then in terms of children and families, accessible play equipment, funding for sort of District 75, funding for school safety officers, and then vocational training, rehabilitation, and placement services, as well as community-based employment programs for adults with disabilities, and senior centers, providing more support for senior centers. And so these are just some specific ones that I wanted to highlight, but we are going to kind of pull together a letter with priorities, and maybe we can circulate that and do a follow-up meeting with the committee. But are there areas, in addition, I think like the more specific we can get with issues, like I know John DeLuper raised the challenge of there not being a ramp at the Brooklyn Army Terminal at one of the entrances. And so that's like a specific ask that we can actually take and kind of ask EDC when they come. So I'm just wondering, do you have that? Or if there's just something in your own experience that you feel really needs to be addressed, and maybe it's not on the level of specificity where it relates to a specific agency, but it's just something that you would like to get off your chest or share to have us include in this sort of list of priorities.
I think it's a good list. I did want to mention a couple of things quickly. One, on you mentioned curb cuts. There is an agreement to redo curb cuts around the city. We were there's actually a 25-year lawsuit. We were interveners in the last few years, but pushing for your community to get those is important, showing I'm not sure how they put together that list. Another issue is accessible pedestrian signals. There was a lawsuit brought by our attorneys, disability rights advocates, on behalf of American Council of the Blind and individual plaintiffs, and it's unclear how that will proceed. There was a ruling in the favor of the plaintiffs, and there were arguments that Valerie and I attended last couple of weeks over how that would be settled. The city, argued for a 30-year plus plan, and the plaintiffs were arguing for a 10-year plan, which is what we support. I don't know the situation with the police precincts in your district. I have a list someplace of which are accessible. The city actually says that all of its precincts are inaccessible, even though there may be some feature that makes them somewhat accessible. That's what they argued in court. I'm not sure of the status of any police precincts in your district, but it's worth looking at. In some cases, it's so obvious, that, there's steps to get in, and maybe there's an entrance in the back through the, garbage bins and so on. Sometimes there's not even that. And of course, there are other accessibility problems that you've apparently encountered in your own office, like bathrooms and so on. But just getting in seems like the bare minimum. I think that might be worth looking at. It's a very disputed question and maybe out of the, range of your committee, but obviously the way police respond to mental health emergencies is a huge issue. We're having a debate actually within our own, committee that we're trying to put together, the platform for public safety. But the use of other ways of responding to mental health crises is really important. Let's see. On housing, you mentioned that you're putting together a committee, and I think that's really important. There may be specific recommendations that we have in our platform about increasing the amount of accessible housing. We had a forum a few years ago at several workshops. we were asked to put on through a group that was working with the city to find out what the what disabled people thought about housing in Brooklyn. And it was really shocking, but the lack of affordable housing and the lack of accessible housing was the prime concern. We could have done that without getting the few $1,000s we got to put down the workshops. But it's so obvious, and it is really, shocking that both of, some of the housing in New York City that's being built that's called affordable obviously isn't, and it is not appropriately accessible. So those are some things. It sounds like you really have thought about this a fair amount. Just trying to think if there's anything else. Obviously making sure your meetings are fully accessible. We've called on city entities, including committees like this, to have American Sign Language interpretation as a matter of course. And certainly at the community board level, if not the committee level. And that's something that should be pursued. It's years ago in the 1980s, when United Spinal, which was then known as the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, sued the MTA over the lack of access in buses. The response from many people, well, I never see any people in wheelchairs using the buses. Yeah, because they couldn't. And that is the same with civic engagement among the deaf community. They're pretty shut out. I work very closely with another independent living center that focuses on deaf and blind New Yorkers. And, they're not engaged at all because they can't be. So that's another thing that I would want you to urge the council to start doing and to work on in your committees and at the full board level.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, that is something that accessible meetings over the last few years has been a major focus of this committee. And so we've taken steps along that path, as well as trying to add in to the meeting announcements what accommodations can be made available, which is something that we included for this meeting, but it's certainly a practice that we can continue to kind of improve upon and also think about planning for in a strategic way. So we completely hear you. And, we do want to engage more people from the disability community, including people who are deaf. So we appreciate that feedback and those ideas. John, would you like to, I see your hand is raised.
Yes. So actually, I just wanted to follow up on one of the things you mentioned about the precincts in the area. I don't know if this is, I know you talked about making accessible entrances. Does that also include policy things like, I hate to say it, but some of the precincts, 72nd is getting better about it, but 68th is unbelievably terrible. I know that they don't really deal with our district, but they're right at the edge. They park, the cars on the sidewalk, and you have to kind of squeeze through if you want to get to the entrance. I know that's not like an infrastructure thing, but is that part of your work on your trying to advocate for accessible entrances?
Our lawsuit is about the physical accessibility of the houses themselves. So in negotiations, I think it's going to be hard. My own sense of precinct houses at this point is that the police actually do not want you to come in, and they've set up gates and so on. Yeah, they've set up gates and other blockades, including vehicles. So I think this is a question that it's not part of. As I said, we're certainly happy to join in advocacy about it, but I think that's something that probably the board would have to push for at these individual precincts. Not to, I'm not sure, who knows, there'll be a new mayor, some connections I've heard with the police, and perhaps there will be a different approach. but I think it would probably involve individual, some negotiation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But it's thanks. That's a really, in our platform, we may, there's only so many things you can mention, but I think that's something that we need to think about putting in.
Thank you.
Well, I think in terms of our next steps, because I just want to be conscious of time and everyone's time. This has been really informative and helpful, and we hope that you'd be willing to come back in the future and or share the platforms that you create and share your work with us, because it's so helpful. I know one priority for us has been and continues to be outreach to people within our own district who are, it's a large percentage of many people have, disabilities across our entire population. And we just want to ensure that we are getting the word out to advocates and growing the work of this committee. So also any feedback in the future that you have that could help us continue to broaden sort of this group and engagement at the district level would be greatly appreciated. And I think just in the interest of time, what we'll do, unless there's someone else on this call that feels that this is, opposes this approach, what Sandra and I will do is collate what we've learned from this meeting, as well as a summary of the accessibility related expense budget items, as well as the priorities that we've discussed as a committee, and sort of organize that into a letter that we can send to a draft of a letter that we can send to elected officials, and then do a follow-up meeting, just a short meeting where we can check in and just make sure that we have everyone's kind of input, because we're hoping that not only is this a letter, but it'll also help us strategize our work thinking to the new year. So for example, one thing is that many of us serve on other committees that connect with accessibility, almost all of them. And so perhaps we can have liaisons and we can identify who's going to be the liaison, who will always be sitting in on the transportation meeting, who will be the person who's going to be on the housing workforce, the accessible and affordable housing workforce committee. So we'd like to we'll use that next meeting to organize ourselves. But this was an excellent opportunity for us to get more informed and to really learn from our friends at BCID. So thank you so much. And is there anybody else who came this evening, had something they wanted to share in terms of priorities or this process or anything related to accessibility that you'd like to see addressed in the district, aside from the many issues that we've discussed tonight? No?
Hi, if I may, this is Sammy.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to share that as you went down the list of the priorities, the last issue, in my humble opinion, I think is the most important issue. And I think that's kind of like, I know we left that for last, but I think that should actually be the start, right? Because by engaging is where we garner more support for all these other agenda items. And I just wanted to share that. And thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason we wanted to invite BCID here this evening. And we could even do the same and continue to invite organizations that are working with people who have disabilities, as well as self-advocates. We really want to sort of widen the circle. And I agree with you 100%, Sam. So if we can all kind of make that a top priority, that will enrich the work and help us really address the needs that are out there. So thanks so much. And I hope everyone has a great evening, and I appreciate your time.
Bye-bye. Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cindy. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks so much.
Good night.